been talking so far about some of the fundamental needs of human beings in infancy, childhood, and early adolescence, okay? And we have been focusing on the biological, the psychological, and the moral, ethical, the spiritual aspects of the growth of children. And we said that the three main areas that we need to focus on to help our children to grow in a very healthy manner are in the areas of their capacity to know, their capacity to love, their feelings, and their capacity to will, to decide. Now, I have discussed these issues at length in my book, The Psychology of Spirituality. It is a very lengthy discussion, so it is not something that we can cover all of them in this session. But from the questions that you have been asking, it is very clear that one of the most challenging aspects of raising children and dealing with adolescents, with teenagers, is the whole issue of their behavior. What do you do when child behaves in a wrong way? That's the main issue. So what I like to do now is to share with you some thoughts about different approaches to correcting behavior of people, to see which one is the healthiest approach, and to suggest that you reflect on your own families and to see which mode you use. And if it is a healthy mode, marvelous. And if it is not a healthy mode, then you may decide to change it. So that would help us to understand why children behave badly in certain families and what we can do to create a healthy environment in the family, okay? Now, I have described this again in another book of mine, Unity, the Creative Foundation of Peace. But we need to look at that more carefully here together. In history of humanity, people have focused on a number of issues related to us as human beings, okay? In other words, we human beings are different from animals in many ways. And one of them is that we have to make sense of our world. The world has to make sense to us, okay? So usually, therefore, we have an orientation in life, an orientation about what is important, what is the most important thing in life, okay? And this orientation that we have determines the worldview that we have. In other words, all of us have a view of the world. This is the life orientation of what is most important thing about life. And here is the worldview of how this world functions. We all have a notion of how the world functions. And then within this functioning of the world and this worldview that we have and the life orientation, we always then use our intellectual and emotional capacities in certain manner. Okay? So it is the way that we express our intellectual and emotional qualities. And then we always organize our relationships in a certain way. Okay? So the nature of relationships is very much related to what we think life is important in life, what we think the world is like, the way we give importance to intellectual and emotional aspects of life. This determines the way that we relate to each other. Okay? Now, every parent has a perspective of what is the most important thing in life, has a perspective of how the world is, has a perspective about what is the most important about our development, whether it's intellectual, whether it's emotional, it is both. Usually people don't have a concept about the spiritual, but we put it here in this respect. And they also, on the basis of these views, then they decide the nature of the relationships that they have. Now, when we look at the history of humanity, when we look at different cultures, immediately it becomes clear that the most important thing always is related to security, to a sense of security, to survival, and to issues like that. In other words, if what people think is the most important is what they think is important about them being able to survive in this life. Okay, that's what really comes to be important. And because humanity grew up on this planet, developed in this planet, and in a helpless manner, just think of our ancestors 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. They didn't have any homes. They didn't have any knowledge of food. They even haven't discovered fire yet. They didn't have any medicine or hospitals or any of the things that we have, no clothes, nothing, okay? They were at the mercy of the forces of nature, okay? Now imagine under those circumstances, what becomes the most important thing to protect your life? There are wild animals. There are forces of nature that coming upon you. You have to struggle constantly in order to survive. Physical labor is extremely important. So what do you think becomes the most important thing that the person says, if I don't have that, I will not survive?
Is it the developmental model of decision making?
No, it's not. It's nothing to do with that.
Force. Power.
Power. Power. Power. Power becomes the most important instrument for staying alive. And it is not surprising that in the course of history, people always had sought power, has been looking for power. And because men have more physical powers, then men took over the administration of society and took the power for themselves. And they became power-oriented, meaning if you want to stay alive, if you want to have something good in life, if you want to have comfort, if you want to have anything, you first need to have power. Okay? Now, when you develop power, the orientation and fascination with power, then your worldview has a special quality. In other words, you begin to look at the world in a very special way. How do you look at the world? You look at the world from the position of division. What is the division? Powerful and less powerful. Strong and the weak. The wealthy and the poor. Man and woman. White and black. In other words, you divide the world now in two groups. Good people and bad people. Friends and enemies. All of these are decided on the basis of who has more power. So you create dichotomy in your way of looking at the world. This is called dichotomous perception or dichotomy. You think of the world in dichotomy. Dichotomy means division, separation. That's right. You go two directions. That's dichotomy. Also, dichotomy means there are two poles. Pole of good and pole of bad. The opposites. The wealthy and the poor. The powerful and the weak. You see, the world becomes divided. So not only this person thinks power is the most important thing, the power is used to divide. Used to divide. Now in the family, that always shows itself immediately. Who is more powerful? The parent. Who is weaker? The child. So the dichotomy is automatically there. Who has more money? The parent. Who has the less? The child. Dichotomy is created. Okay? And the children immediately feel it. They say, all right, okay, we are in this family, and the power is the most important thing. And the child tests it. For example, the child says to the parent, may I have something? And the parent says, no. And the child says, why? And the parent says, because I tell you so. So it's just simply a statement of power. When child says, but I want it, and start crying, and the parent goes and gives slaps the child. So the child then says, okay, from now on, I know what is the most important thing in life. The most important thing in life is to have power. So I'm going to grow up to have power. What kind of a power? Well, there are two kinds of power that you can have. You can have, first of all, the nature of power is different. For example, you can have physical power, you can have financial power, you can have position of authority power, you can have a combination of all of these. But also you can show your power passively or actively. For example, suppose if the parents who are power oriented, they are very concerned about having a good reputation. They want everybody to say, this family is a very good family. These people are very important people. They don't want to lose face. So always they tell their children, now we have to be very careful, we have to behave right. When we are in front of strangers, we have to be good. You shouldn't play with those people. Those people are from wrong side of the town. They are from wrong race, from the wrong group. They are not our people. They are different from us. So the parents say these things to the child, okay? And when the child disobeys, they hit the child. They punish the child with power. They become punitive. They become punitive, meaning they give punishment as a way of making the child to behave, okay, as they think is right. So when the parents do that, this child says, okay, I better think of a way of dealing with that. So this child goes in several possible ways. One way is the child says, I'm going to become like my father, if it's a boy, for example. I'm going to become strong, I'm going to go and to learn judo and karate, and I'm going to put something on my arm to show that I'm strong, and I'm going to order other people. So usually in these families you see that the older brother, for example, orders the younger brothers and sisters, punish them, you do this, you do that. It just copies the father or mother exactly because it says, okay, I'm going to have power. My father has power over me, I will have power over the ones that are smaller than I am. So if I cannot do something at home to show power, I go to school and beat up the smaller kids. I do that. So I am going to have power. That's one way that children respond to power. Another way that children respond to this kind of a power situation is that they look to see where are the weak points of the parents. And then they go and attack the parents at that weak point. I'll give you an example. A child knows that the parent is very concerned about having a good reputation in the neighborhood. So the child goes to the store in the neighborhood and makes sure that when he's stealing something, he's caught. So the police is called, and everybody knows that the son of Dr. So-and-so or the daughter of Mr. So-and-so has been caught stealing. So what the child is doing now, child showing power against the parent, revenge in a passive way. The father is known as being extremely intelligent, and the child has been tested and has an IQ of 140, and the child doesn't pass any test at the school. So how could that be? You know, you're so smart, and we are so smart, and we are so famous, and this and that as being so smart, and here this child cannot add 2 and 2. Okay? It's nothing to do with intelligence. It's the dynamics at work that this child has to win, has to show power. Okay? Has to show power. So it does that, you see. There's another way that the child does it. So one way is an active looking for power. The other one is passive looking for power. The third way that they do it, these children, is that they give up and they withdraw and they become depressed and they cannot do anything and they become sad and they have to go to the doctor and they have to be seen by a psychiatrist and all of those things because the child is crushed. You see? So either the child becomes like the parent or behaves exactly the opposite of what the parent wants to do, or withdraws and completely become depressed and unhappy and goes back into her own or his own shell. Okay? These are the three major ways that children respond to parents in this kind of family. Okay? Now, also, the problem with dichotomy is that when you have the view of dichotomy, you automatically raise your children to be prejudiced. They are prejudiced, automatically. Automatically say, these people are good, those people are bad. Automatically they say, we are Japanese, therefore we should not be with others. We are Americans, therefore we are the best. We are Swiss, and therefore nobody is as perfect as us. And this kind of a attitude begins to develop, which is the foundation of prejudice. Okay? So children develop that perspective also. Now, in respect to intellectual and emotional expression, the main characteristic of these individuals is rigidity. Rigidity. In other words, these individuals, they have very difficult time with new ideas. They cannot accept new ideas easily. They say, well, if it was good for our parents and our grandparents, why should we change it? Any new idea is frightening to them. So in these families, usually you see that these families are not intellectually very open. They think that they know the answer. They think that they have found the answer. And therefore they become extremely rigid. And any new idea, they are afraid of. They are afraid of anything that is new. Now this, we find it all the time, and this is something that the Baha'i families have to be very careful. Because Baha'is can say, oh, we know everything in the faith, and therefore discourage the children from the process of searching for truth. Every human being has to search for truth independently. This is the very opposite of this model. Okay, this model is, I call it the authoritarian model. And the opposite of the authoritarian rigidity of mind is the independent search for truth. Independent search for truth. So it's very important that when you raise your children, you help the children to have inquisitive minds. In other words, they have to ask questions. Anything that they read, they have to ask questions so that they try to find answers, so that they try to understand it for themselves, so that they would know through their own knowledge and not the knowledge of others, so that they would be free from prejudice, so that they would be universal, so that you would be free. They will be free. This is so fundamental, and we have to make sure that we don't fall into that pattern. You see, the Baha'i families, as I describe this kind of family, you realize that majority of us come from that kind of family. Okay? Majority of humanity comes from this kind of a background, from authoritarian backgrounds. So majority of us are raised in that kind of background. We have our authoritarian parents who were powerful and who said, you do this, and if you disobey me, you will be punished. And that was the only way that they raised us. And they always divided the world to good and bad, us and others. And they were very rigid about new ideas and new concepts and new things. So you have to be careful not to fall into that trap yourself. And this is especially dangerous because you can use the word of God as a source of power. You can use the concept of being a Baha'i, meaning that you're the best, and separating yourself from others. You can use the concept of the writings of the faith, saying you know the whole truth, then why bother to look at anything else? You have to be very careful not to abuse that process, the word of God, and put it into this model. In fact, is that many people do, because they don't free themselves from this model. Because majority of the families in the world are in this model. Actually, the world of humanity still is functioning primarily according to this model. And governments are organized this way. Organizations and factories and companies are organized in authoritarian way. Families are organized in religions are organized in authoritarian way. Everything that in the world we see, they have elements of this. Okay? So, let's go to the other characteristic of intellectual and emotional expression is in respect to emotions. And there is a rigidity in respect to emotions, not only in respect to thoughts, but in respect to emotions. For the authoritarian individual, for the power-oriented individual, emotions belong to women and to weak people. Strong people and men don't cry, and they don't show emotions. There is only one emotion that strong men show, or strong people show. What is that? Anger. Yes, anger you show. You go hit and rave and rant and do all of those things. Because, why that? Because anger gives you more power. So when you see these authoritarian people, you see that they go with this enormous degree of anger. And they get angry at these people, they get angry at that people, they use legal means, they go sue people, they hit people, they do everything. And they feel self-righteous. They feel that they're doing the right thing. In the name of law and order and name of everything, they do these things. Okay? So anger becomes their main expression of emotions. Other emotions are looked as signs of weakness. And in these families, love is conditional. In other words, the parent says to the child, I love you as long as you obey me. If you obey me, I love you. If you don't obey me, then I don't love you. So they love as long as the child obeys. And when the child doesn't obey, they hit the child, they kick the child out, they do the whole thing, because that's their perspective. This is called the authoritarian family. You have authoritarian societies, you have authoritarian organizations, you have authoritarian families, you have authoritarian individuals. All of them behave in the same manner. And then the other characteristic is in respect to relationships. And in relationships, they have the authoritarian hierarchy. Authoritarian hierarchy means the order of power. In other words, in these families, somebody, hierarchy, H-I-E-R-A-R-C-H-Y, hierarchy, means they're creating the order of power. In other words, this person has most power, this person has the second most power, third power, fourth power, and comes down, okay? And this not necessarily is related to age or sex. You know, sometimes you will go to a family and you see that a 12-year-old is the most powerful. And sometimes you go and see that the father is the most powerful, or mother is most powerful, or the youngest child is most powerful. It depending on the dynamics of each family. Each family is different. But there is always a hierarchy. And what is the most important issue about hierarchy? The most important issue about hierarchy is obedience. Obedience. In other words, the person who is on the higher than you expects you blind obedience. And then you expect from the person below you blind obedience. In other words, it's like an army. There is a hierarchy, and everybody has rank, and everybody has certain powers. Okay? For example, recently there was, 3 days ago, there was this ex-Nazi person in Italy was being on trial, was being tried. And he had killed some 350 people, and he said, yes, I killed them. And his only defense was, I was obeying orders. I was obeying orders. This is called blind obedience. That you accept things without questioning it.
In the army.
In the army or in family or in anywhere. Anywhere. Most of us do those things, even though we are not in the army. We accept if somebody tells us to do something, and because that person is very famous, or that person we think is very knowledgeable, or that person because has money, or that person has power, we say, oh, so-and-so said this, therefore we do it. And if you don't investigate the truth for yourself, and you don't use your own responsibility, then you are engaged in blind obedience. And blind obedience was what caused the enormous atrocities of the Second World War or any war, and so forth, okay? And what happens is that when you don't obey, you're punished. So people obey because they don't want to be punished. Many of the, for example, abuse of children, why children are beaten up? Because they don't obey. You see, that's why. Why women are beaten up by men in the family? Even you ask the man, you say, why did you hit her? He say, she didn't listen to me. In other words, she didn't obey. So this whole issue of obedience in the context of authoritarian system backfires. Obedience is a good thing, but not within this system. Within this system, obedience becomes a blind activity without personal responsibility. and usually ends in violence. Okay? So this model of behavior, which we call it the authoritarian model, has been the most common model in the history of humanity. And even today is extremely common. Many nations, many societies, millions and millions and millions of families, many organizations, many schools, many churches, many religious orders are all organized according to the authoritarian mode. Okay? Now, it wasn't until this century that people began to say possibly the authoritarian mode is not a good mode after all. That may be something wrong about the authoritarian mode. So what happened was that after the Second World War, there was so much confusion in the minds of leaders of mind, leaders of thought. Why civilized people behave in such an uncivilized manner? Okay? Here, for example, was Germany, the most, in quotation marks, civilized nation in the world, God-fearing, educated, orderly, all of those. How come they allowed themselves to do destruction that they did? What was at the root of it? Okay? So Germany wasn't the only country. There were many countries that they had in mind that they studied and say, we have to understand these nations and so forth. So a number of research was done. And the outcome of this research was that people who are raised in authoritarian families are capable of obeying orders blindly and commit the most awful violence. And therefore they said that we have to replace the authoritarian with something else. Okay? So it was in response to these experiences that in different places, but particularly in North America and the Scandinavian countries, so people start saying that we no longer should be authoritarian. We are going to replace power with something else. And what they replaced the power with was with something that was very interesting. They said children usually cry or behave badly because they want something. Therefore, instead of saying no to the children, we should say yes to the children. Which makes sense. So they said, okay, we should be far less controlling of the children. We should let the children be free. Let the children do what they want. Let the children be natural. Let the nature take its course. We shouldn't frustrate children. We shouldn't make children to cry a lot. We should not emphasize order. We should emphasize freedom. We should emphasize creativity. So these were beautiful words. You say, wow, my God, this is really exciting, So a new mode of raising children in the families began to develop. And the fundamental characteristics of these were that instead of the harsh control of the authoritarian, we have to be, the way they put it, loving, accepting, approving, giving to our children. All of this sounds beautiful. We shouldn't frustrate them. We should let them what they want to have. We should give them things, and so on. And they experimented these and wrote many books about it, the virtues of this kind of upbringing. And 3-4 generations later, we suddenly began to see a new kind of young people in our midst and children. And these young people, for them, the most important thing in life was not power. It was pleasure. They said, what is the most important thing in life is to have fun. So these children, you would say to them, they start actually having a special, okay? They start having a special kind of orientation. For example, they appeared in United States in the form of hippies, hippie movement. And the hippie movement had the slogans. And the slogan was, for example, make love, not war. Or do it if it feels good. Or look after the number 1. Or live one day at a time. All of these were focused on pleasure. What you should do in life to have pleasure. This is the most important objective. So how do you get pleasure? Well, those youth, that was the era when the drug use began, wasn't it? When they started doing experimentation with LSD, with marijuana, with all of the drugs, they all just came out. That was the era that sexuality became free. And the people start having more and more sex, free sex. That's the time that began to actively say that marriage is not good. That's the time that that was an enormous excitement going on. For example, in the United States, at that time I was living in the United States, and the whole society was so excited about freeing itself from all of these authoritarian standards and that so forth that was in the society. And the society became extremely permissive, extremely pleasure-oriented. And that was the era that even in the area of relationships, the relationship, the worldview, the dichotomy gave place to a different perspective. And that different perspective was the perspective of individualism. Individualism. In other words, instead of separating you from me, say you for yourself, I for myself. And you for yourself, and you for yourself, everybody for themselves. So it became the era of extreme degree of individualism and the expression of individualistic perspectives. You see, that's what happened. So the society became extremely more pleasure-oriented and individualistic. Parents raised their children according to these standards. Parents decided to give the children what they want. Give them something. Give them this. Give them that. Give them that. Don't let the child be anxious. Don't let the child to be suffering. And because everybody didn't agree with that, many parents disagreed. One parent would say we should do it this way, another person said we should do it that way. And one would say, but this is wrong because it does this, 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 and the other one says that's wrong because it does that, that, and that. And we saw these processes developing in many families, many societies. Also, the standards of family became weaker and weaker. The interest in marriage became weaker. People began to have experimentation with the new modes of marriage, with exchange of partners, with all of the things that became common, the living together before getting married. All of these were responses against the authoritarian mode and in a favor of a new mode that was developing. And the emerging societies in the world today, the societies that have been very rigid and authoritarian until now, like Chinese society, like Japanese society, like Indian society, the traditional societies. Now you see that they are going this route. More and more and more you see that, while the Scandinavian countries and North America have passed beyond that and are now harvesting the fruits of that lifestyle. Russia is going from authoritarian to the indulgent. That's right. And this mode I have called the indulgent mode. The indulgent mode. So the indulgent is the opposite of the authoritarian. Indulgent means extreme permissiveness and selfishness and self-centeredness and individualism. Okay? So the pendulum went from one end to the other end. That's what happened. Just bang from one to the other. Okay? And so the society became pleasure-oriented, the family became pleasure-oriented, people became individualistic or self-centered or selfish. These are different degrees of that same phenomena or different expressions of the same phenomena. And in respect to intellectual and emotional expressions, rigidity was replaced with promiscuity. People became promiscuous. Promiscuity therefore became the name of the game, promiscuity. Okay, that's what happened. So it is not surprising that we have such a promiscuous society, such promiscuous people in every respect, in arts, in sciences, in behavior, in moral and ethical issues, in every respect. What we are facing is promiscuity. Now, promiscuity doesn't mean openness. Let me read for you what promiscuous means. Promiscuity means disregard for laws. Promiscuity means prostitution of arts and of sciences. Promiscuity is the most awful possible thing that you can do. Is the opposite, negative opposite of rigidity. Rigidity is awful. Promiscuity is awful. Both of them create enormous difficulties in every respect of life of people. So here we are dealing with the outcome of that change, that shift from authoritarian to permissive and indulgent mode. And this shift took place in a very gradual way. And people didn't realize what was happening. And even now, majority of leaders, thinkers, and so forth, they don't think in these ways that I'm describing. They don't call themselves promiscuous, but they are promiscuous. In every aspect of their lives, they are promiscuous. And we know that. And, okay. Promiscuity means consisting of a haphazard mixture. And in other words, things that are put together without thought. Any actions and a behavior that is put together without reason, without thought, without reasoning, for example. Indiscriminate mingling, okay? That gives you, and then the example is gives, such as promiscuous sexual relationship. What is promiscuous sexual relationship? It doesn't matter whether you're married or not married. It doesn't matter the other person is married or not married. You just want to have sex, you go and have sex. That's called promiscuity. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we are talking about here. So anyway, it was not only in respect to emotions that we became promiscuous and respect to behavior, we became also promiscuous in respect to thoughts. So people no longer began to search for truth. People would say, oh, you are in Baha'i. I am in jogging. You see, that's the way people talk. And so, oh, you believe in Baha'i, I believe in jogging, or I believe in dieting, or I believe in, God knows, collecting stamps or something like that. Because the whole notion of thought, of thinking, of reflection, of deciding what is important in life, it just simply was thrown out. Not only that, the whole concept of truth became relative. Not relative in the sense that all truth is relative because our understanding of truth is relative, but relative in the sense of every person saying, oh, that's your truth, and that's your truth, and that's your truth, as though there is no fundamental universal truth. Okay? And this behavior also expresses itself at the international level right now. For example, when it comes to issue of, for example, equality of men and women and treatment of women, they say, well, this culture deals with the issue of equality this way, and that religion deals with that way, and that other culture or country does it that way. So what they are doing is exactly this promiscuous attitude. Because they are not willing to look for a standard of truth, universal standard. Because of that, then their approach to truth becomes personal and individualistic. And it changes according to their desires, their needs, their circumstances. So there is no standard of behavior. Everything becomes then relative. And children who are growing up in these kind of families, they are extremely preoccupied with pleasure. They want and want and want and want and want and want and want, and when you don't give them, they get violent and they get angry and they get upset. And they disobey and they do whatever they want to do. They are extremely individualistic and selfish, and they're very promiscuous in their behavior. That's what happens. And in their relationships, they act in a way of anarchy. The relationship is that of anarchy. Anarchy. There is no order. Anarchy. Anarchy. There is no order in their lives. Okay? This is the way they relate. Now, this mode developed in response to the authoritarian mode. You want to say something?
Many of the people who adopted the indulgent model.
Yes.
It's true that many of them were raised in an authoritarian
That's right.
setting.
That's right. That's right, because we are only 2-3 generations away from this phenomenal shift that took place from authoritarian to the indulgent. And consequently, what we are now seeing increasingly is a mixture of authoritarianism and indulgence. We see families are mixed, they have mixture. They are in certain area very indulgent, in certain area very authoritarian. We see governments in that mixture. The best example is North America, United States, for example, is a mixture of extreme authoritarianism and extreme indulgence. And we see that happening all over the world, just taking over the world of humanity. Yes.
It seems that people are now orienting their lives to seek power, and those with power
have pleasure.
Indulge in pleasure.
Absolutely. That's the whole idea. Now, the whole idea is to have power in order to have pleasure. This has become the objective. Okay? Children, you ask the children, what you want to do when you grow up? And say, oh, I want to become a computer scientist. Why? Because I can make a lot of money. Or I want to be a doctor. Why? Because then I would have a prestige in the society and I can have what I want. You see, or I become a politician. Why? Because I can have everything I want, and kind of thing. That's the thinking now. The thinking is to have power and pleasure together. Now, throughout history of humanity, power and pleasure was something that the leaders had. The leaders of society, the kings, the emperors, religious leaders, they all combined power and pleasure for themselves. They did that. Okay? This is the history of humanity. When you read the history, that's what you read. Accounts of power and pleasure and corruption. Okay? Now, this same phenomena that the kings and emperors and religious leaders had it in the past is becoming accessible to everybody. So ordinary people are seeking the same thing. Okay? And the main fundamental issue, interesting issue about these issues, these dynamics of power and pleasure is that doesn't matter how much you get is not enough. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you want more. You never feel satisfied. You never feel rich enough. You know, we have had a number of leaders of different governments being put in jail because of the enormous monies that they have stolen. You know, it's not 1 million, it's not 2 million, it's not 20 million, it's not 200 million, it's 500 million, a billion. You know, how much is enough for you to feel rich? You never would feel rich. Because in the riches, you feel poverty. That's what it is. The same thing is about power. How many people died during the reign of Stalin? 60 million people. Did he feel powerful? No. He was frightened all the time. Hitler, the same. Mao, the same. Khomeini, the same. All the leaders. Doesn't matter how powerful they feel weak. Why the world of humanity has so much armaments? Why governments have so much armament in the world? It's not because they feel powerful, it's because they feel weak. You see, that's why. Because if you feel powerful, you don't need it. It is this, you know. So the more power they seek, the weaker they become. The more insecure they become. This is the dynamic of power and wealth when it's devoid from spiritual principles. The more you get it, the more the opposite of it you feel. The more power you have, the weaker you feel. The more vulnerable you feel. The more riches you have, the more poverty you experience. And the more poor you feel. And that's the reason that it goes to extreme and extreme and extremes and extremes. And then they do anything to get their way. You know, these companies that make money, for example, selling cigarettes, or for example, you know, making this enormous advertisement to sell to children, to parents of third world countries, milk products, so that they say you're going to be more beautiful if you don't breastfeed, and you're going to be this. Thousands, millions of children die because they are fed not by their mothers but on these artificial foods. Why they do that is to get money. Okay, these are all expressions of these authoritarian and indulgent modes that the world of humanity now is living by, and young people become victims of it. So your 13-year-old that you described is taking the example of one of the parents of being authoritarian. You don't tell me what to do. I know it all. If you look at the family, you see that there is an authoritarian family. So the child follows that route. So it's not surprising what the children do. Another child withdraws, doesn't go to school. It's another expression of an authoritarian family. That is, you know. So you have to, and usually in what I've seen in, for example, in North America, in Europe, in Japan, in China, is that authoritarian parents are both authoritarian and indulgent. Both of them. They, on the one hand, they indulge the child. On the other hand, they demand obedience in a blind way, an authoritarian way, in a dividing way from children. These are therefore the two ways. Now, the third way we will discuss this afternoon, of what is alternative. Is there an alternative? But before we do that, it would be a good idea for us to discuss now about your own personal observations about the authoritarian indulgent in the families that you know. I know your families are all perfect. I know that. So when you talk about it, I know you're talking about another family and not yourself. Okay. So feel comfortable to say whatever you want. All right. Yes.
It was wonderful. I love that.
Yeah.
You said that children, they ask parents that what is this, what is that, and we have to tell them to search after truth.
Yes.
But I think that if the parents they answer that what is good or what is bad, or they give their own opinion, it means without searching after truth, the child has got a solution in his hand. And how can he go after the truth? How could we do that?
No. You're taking the concept of search by truth literally. Of saying, you don't sit with the child and say, okay, you go and search for truth. You don't do that. You create an atmosphere in the family that when some decision is being made, reasons are given. Logic is there. Discussion is there. You sit with the child, say, let's together look into see what is the best thing to do. Let's see what Baha'u'llah says. Let's see what we find in scientific books. Let's do this, let's do that. You engage in a process of finding an answer. If you think you know it all, and you say to the child, okay, I know what is right, and here it is, as most parents do, then the child doesn't learn how to search for truth. And not only that, if the child doesn't like you, if the child is angry at you, he would make sure that he would go exactly the opposite of what you think is right. Therefore, if you say that it is the right thing to be nice to people, he makes sure that he's not nice to people because he's angry at you. So that's the reason that you have to engage, you have to create a home environment, and you have to be patient. And you shouldn't think that you know it all. Maybe you don't know it all. And you have to help go step by step with this child to move to the next stage. You see? So that's a very important process that requires a lot of patience, a lot of humility on the part of the parent. Definitely you cannot be authoritarian and behave like that because it goes against it, you know. You still see, okay, I know the truth, why waste so much time to try to find it, you know, let me tell him, and that's it. That's the way the parents do, you know, and you know.
Thank you. That's why we have this. You're supposed to have the family gathering and consultation in the family to decide something.
That's one aspect of it, yes.
Thank you. The second one is that we know that Baha'u'llah has said that children must obey parents without any questions.
Yes.
This is a rule. How could we achieve that one? Are you going to?
You have to become a parent. You have to become a parent whose children would obey without question. This is what Baha'u'llah says. Children should obey their parents. The other side of it is that the parents should become a kind of a parents that the children would want to obey. Okay, it's not one-sided process. It's not only the child should obey the parent. It's also the parent should be obeyable, so to speak. Okay.
Well, the danger there about being obeyable with authoritarian systems.
That's right. That's the reason that we have to find other ways. Authoritarian doesn't work. That's the reason. Okay. All right, go ahead.
In a family where the children have grown up in an authoritarian, a mixture of authoritarian
And an indulgent, yes.
Is it sufficient for them, when we want to change that, is it sufficient for them to receive a third kind of education that we shall talk this afternoon? And if it's not sufficient, how can we do it so that they forget that and accept the other one?
I think the fundamental issue that they are going to have to learn is consultation.
But will they forget this authoritarian
It's
way?
consultation. How to help children who have been raised according to the authoritarian and indulgent mode to now respond to a new mode. Because consultation by itself would help to bring down the authoritarian tendencies and the indulgent tendencies. Consultation is by its very nature opposed both to authoritarianism and indulgence. That's by its very nature. Mm-hmm. Okay? But majority of people, don't know how to consult. I mean majority. And the whole practice of consultation is so superficially dealt with by people, and we just have learned so little about consultation, and we have to move to a totally new understanding of consultation. Is a very, very complicated issue.
I have a sense that the Baha'i community seems to be, or has been over the last 20 or 30 years, more confused about parenting often than the outside world. Because, for instance, in my family, I was raised in an authoritarian setting, but then my parents became Baha'is, and it was a time when people were looking for answers for parenting, and suddenly they threw out this authoritarian model.
And became indulgent.
And it was indulgent, and
That's
you
right.
could see the difference between the older children in
That's
my
right.
family and
Exactly. Yes.
and it was because they were searching for
That's right.
ideas,
That's
but there seems to be a lot of confusion, and only now are we beginning to see some...
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Baha'i families, Baha'i assemblies, Baha'i communities, either are authoritarian or indulgent or a mixture. And they are confused. They don't know what to do. They don't know what's right, what's wrong. It's the same as non-Baha'i community, okay? Except that the elements of answer are all there. But we have to now reflect and think and develop a profoundly new approaches to issue of raising children, which you wouldn't find in the existing psychological literature that are there. Psychological literature basically try to teach you how to balance between the authoritarian and indulgent modes of behavior. That's basically they try to teach you the balance. While what we are trying to do, what I'm trying to say is that we have to move beyond that. We have to reject both the authoritarian and indulgent models and come up with a new model and a new understanding, a new perspective, a new mindset about these issues. And then begin to train ourselves as parents, as adults, so that in dealing with our children, we begin to deal with them. And to raise our children in such a way that when they have children themselves, they wouldn't go the route of authoritarian and indulgence. All of us have been raised in authoritarian or indulgent or a mixture of those kind of families. There's, most all of us. There are very few that have been spared.
Very difficult to know where is the limit of authority and indulgence.
That's right.
Very difficult to consult.
It is.
I give my example. This child doesn't want to learn.
That's right.
He say, I come to Landegg, but I want to go to play.
Yes.
I can find a friend, one friend, and go to
play.
And
yeah.
then we are consulting. The life is not only playing. You must learn something. No, I don't want to learn. And then I become authoritarian. I say, you go to the class or you go back home.
Yeah. No, that's not authority. No, it's not authority. Yeah, that's not authority. See, that's important. That's a very good question, the issue that you raised. Here is a child. You have brought the child to a course, to a study. The child comes and says, I don't want to study. Okay? Yes. We say, well, I want to play, he says. We say, well, if you want to play, you will go back to Africa and you play. If you want to study, you stay here. You can have one or the other. You don't say to him, if you had said to him, you go to class or else I will punish you. I don't give you any let's say, money for 5 months, or I beat you up, or whatever, then you're authoritarian. But if you say, you have two options, oh 13-year-old person, okay? One option, if you want to play, you go there to play. The other one is, if you want to study, you stay here. You choose.
Yes, but consultation doesn't...
That's consultation. That's, no. You see, again, we have misunderstood about the concept of consultation. Consultation is not just simply sitting around talking until you're blue in the face. And then you say, okay, let's do this or that way. That's not consultation. While most people think that's consultation. Okay? Consultation is not talking. Consultation is not just exchange of ideas. Consultation is a totally different process. Okay? We will talk about it. And a consultation between parent and a child is very different in its approach and mode than the consultation in a spiritual assembly, or consultation between the doctor and patient. Well, that's a totally different consultation. That's a medical. Yeah, the word consultation doesn't apply there. No, really. The different use of the word consultation, this is different meaning. But consultation is a is a new art Baha'u'llah has given to us, and we have to learn it. I would describe some essentials of it during the next few days. But then you see whether you are doing it or not in the family, you see. And then we can continue. But what you described is not being authoritarian. What you are describing is to establish a certain standards. You remember we said that children have to function within established framework. The established framework has to be reasonable, but has to be firm. And within that framework, you have freedom. You know? Finish.
No, after I have another example.
Okay, then we go to others and then come back to you.
Can I ask a question? Did you, before you decided to come here, did you discuss the what was on the course and that it would be study?
Yes.
And did he accept that it would be study, or did you not consult with him and say we're going to Landegg and you're coming with me, and it will be very nice?
No, he knows we come to Landegg. There is a course for children, and he is in the course. But he wanted to come with us because before Landegg we went to Paris. He had a lot of
fun there,
and then we come here, and all this is together. He will come with us. There is Landegg also. He will not come. He can stay.
So he was aware that there was this course of Landegg?
Yes, he was. He was actually here last year, but he wasn't in the class.
He wasn't in the. No, he had to go back to school.
He had to go back to school.
The
right.
He
was right.
Now he knows, but he is very clever. He balanced.
That's
he said, I go with him. I have pleasure. I have fun in Paris, and when we go there, he.
I put him on the spot. Yeah. The children do that always, manipulate, and they learn how to manipulate.
He is trying to know where is the limit of his forces.
That's right. Yes.
He can go.
He wants to how far he can go. How far he can go. Okay.
I can understand the authoritarian mindset and indulgent mindset.
Yes,
opposite. But in our society, in Japan also, we have...
Both of them, I know that.
To give examples, I know that, but how it is working in life, I couldn't understand.
Well, you know the Japanese society better than I do, but from little things that I observed and I saw, I give an example about school, about home, and about the society. Okay? In homes in Japan, parents demand absolute obedience from their children, right? And the parents say to the children, you have to obey. And they usually don't give a reason to the children why they should obey. They say, this is the Japanese way, or this is a good way. But tell me if I'm wrong, okay? This is my simplified understanding how the Japanese family functions. And in the Japanese family, father is the most powerful. And then is mother, and then there are boys, and then there are girls. It's in that order. Is that correct? Usually. All right. Okay. So that's the... Now, Japanese families, many of them are rich also. Okay? So what the families have learned, the parents have learned, is that they can make the children to obey them by giving them something. So they say to the child, if you obey me, I'll let you to have a good clothes. If you obey me, I send you for a trip to somewhere. If you obey me, I buy you a car. If you obey me, this and that. So the child then learns two things. One is that somebody always has the power. So it's a good idea for you when you grow up to have the power. And second, that when you are power, you can be indulged. You can get things. So it combines the things together like that. You see? The other example is that the schools in Japan are very authoritarian. Is that true? Yeah? The schools are very authoritarian. The schools are more authoritarian than homes. Okay? So consequently, the child compares the authoritarian, forceful, difficult condition of school and decides not to go to school. Decides to go against the school because his family is more forgiving. You see? Authoritarian schools in Japan are so common that all of these school bullying, what is the Japanese name?
Ijime.
Ijime, yeah. Ijime, the school bullying, has become so common is because these children are caught between authoritarian and indulgent modes. They go from one to the other. They become authoritarian themselves.
What is bullying?
Bullying, fighting, hitting, aggressive. So,
Smaller and
yeah. So the bigger boys or bigger group hits on the smaller group. Teachers are the biggest, they hit on everybody. The boys and the girls get together and create a powerful group and they hit on the boys and girls that are not like them and make fun of them, they beat them up, they do all kind of things that they do and so forth.
Only one or two children are targeted.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, one or two always. Because this is the whole issue of dichotomy. You see, in the authoritarian environment, you divide. You say, those two children are the target now. They are not good because, whatever, because of whatever reason, okay? And then they attack that child, they make fun of that child, they beat up that child, they make life miserable for that child, so much so that sometimes that child commits suicide, okay? That's what they do. This is a classical authoritarian behavior. But the school system also is indulgent in Japan. They are indulgent in expression of authoritarian behaviors. In other words, when the kids behave in an authoritarian way by bullying other kids, the school doesn't stop it. They close their eyes to it. Because in essence, those kids are doing what the teachers want to do. Okay? The teachers also don't like those kids that have been, yeah. That's the reason that sometimes you see the teachers attack the students, and there was a case when I was in Japan that the teacher had killed a student because the student wasn't obeying. So you see this dynamics, they feed on each other. Everybody does it. The whole society also is very indulgent and authoritarian at the same time. You see it in the political system very clearly. In the political system, you also saw in that the best example of it in the ideological was the sect. You remember what the characteristic of the sect is? That the leader was extremely authoritarian on the one hand, and then indulgent on the other hand. And he then attracted all of these people and made them to do unbelievable things, killing people and all of those kind of things, because it combined those two characteristics with each other.
Hitler was the same.
Yeah, Hitler was the same. These are the individuals who understand the dynamics of authoritarian indulgence very well, and they manipulate people and make them to do these things. Okay, and these things would continue to happen until the society finally realizes that they have to give up these modes and choose a new way of behaving.
Sometimes the children do extremely dangerous things like playing with knife, and I think in that circumstances we have to be very firm, or maybe we could say authoritarian.
No. You see, you have to not mistake authoritarian with authority. Okay? With responsibility. At any given time, there has to be certain authority and responsibility, sense of responsibility. At Landegg Academy, we are not authoritarian, but we definitely have authority. How do we establish our authority? Very simple. We establish our authority saying certain behavior is not acceptable at Landegg Academy. You cannot have a knife or a gun or something like that. You cannot drink. You cannot, children and so forth, smoke. You cannot bring any drugs here. These are our standards, okay? And then we say, these standards, as long as you obey it, you have total freedom then, function here. If you don't want to obey it, goodbye. You don't need to be here, okay? So somebody decides to test us to see whether we mean it or not. So comes with a gun or comes with a knife. We just simply get rid of them and say, no, thank you very much, go. This is not authoritarian. This is establishing the standards of civilized community and saying, according to these standards of civilized community, this is what should be there. And we don't then have a police to go and look around and this and that. We just simply expect people to accept it. And if people don't want to accept it, they go. Now, for family, that's more difficult because you cannot say to your child, goodbye, Charlie. You should go. Okay? Yes, many do it. I know that. In North America, for example, when a child reaches 16, and if child doesn't behave, the parents say, oh, okay, you go, you have come of age, I'm not responsible, go on welfare and do whatever. They do that. This is the authoritarian mode, okay? But when we say we shouldn't be authoritarian, doesn't mean that we should be without laws, doesn't mean that we should be lawless, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have standards. It means your approach to order changes. We are not suggesting that we should be disorderly. We are suggesting that your approach to order should change. Your approach to power has to change. Your approach to pleasure has to change. Your approach to individual needs have to change. Your approach to differences of people have to change. Your approach to emotional processes have to change. And what the questions that comes here, like your question that you gave, it indicates that we still think in the authoritarian mode or in the indulgent mode. But I'm inviting you to begin to think differently. Ask yourself, am I authoritarian? Don't answer it to me, to yourself. Answer it to yourself. Ask yourself, how authoritarian am I? How indulgent am I? Am I a person that is basically authoritarian? Or am I a person, God forbid, I know that. And am I a person that is basically indulgent? Or a mixture of that? And then you ask yourself, how can I change that in myself? You cannot change another person before you can change that. Now, one other thing I have to say, parents have to be careful. Even if you become absolutely and completely perfect, that doesn't mean that your efforts at raising your children would always succeed. It doesn't. Because every child has a will of his own, has a temperament of his own, a mind of his own, emotions of his own. And as they become older, they become more powerful in that respect. And therefore, it's not surprising that in many families that seemingly everything is going well and many children grow up and they will be okay, that one or two child turned out to be different. Okay? These are because of our understanding of the dynamics of raising children haven't yet evolved to a very large degree. For example, Abdul Baha says that different children have different temperaments. And different temperaments, you deal with the children differently. Okay? And we haven't studied temperaments in psychology yet. Okay? It's something that has to be studied in the future. So it's very important not to judge yourself or others only on the basis of the outcome. You have to judge yourself on the basis of how much you try, how hard you try, how knowledgeable about yourself and the dynamics about yourself. And as you do that, you will see that overall the quality of your parenting improves. Okay? Overall. But the transformation first has to take place in the individual. And then goes. Yes, go ahead.
No, this is very difficult. I look at myself. I don't know if I am authoritarian or indulgent.
Or neither. There is a possibility also.
Because
there is a possibility.
Everybody says you are indulgent.
Yeah, indulgent. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know I am authoritarian. I don't know who is.
No, but no, of course it's relative, it's a degree, it's a matter of degree.
Because it's related to the child also.
Yes, it's related, every child is different. Yes, I fully agree.
Authoritarian is one and now.
Exactly. No, but you see, you shouldn't talk about your authoritarian or indulgent with the children. With some children, you have to be more firm in helping those children to grow in a healthy way. With other children, you have to be more giving and more offering freedom in order to help the child to grow, because the temperament of the children is different. The kind of things that they want to do is different. You see? So it's important to realize that people can be neither authoritarian nor indulgent and can be something else aside from those. Okay? We haven't discussed it yet. But you would be surprised that you would find also that those qualities exist in all of us. And therefore the whole idea is to develop qualities that are the healthiest.